A young woman, Iris, is lying on bed at night, unable to sleep. While her husband sleeps, she goes downstairs to the kitchen. She then takes the car and drives aimlessly, hoping to clear her thoughts. Eventually, she leaves the vehicle and continues on foot, drawn to a place filled with memories, the site of her son, Meadow's memorial. She picked up his framed photograph and looked at it crying. Then, she started carving his initials along with hers and her husband's on a tree. As the weight of her sorrow deepens, she is consumed by dark thoughts, standing dangerously close to the edge of a cliff. She closed her eyes and considered jumping and taking one step closer. Just as she contemplates taking that final step, a man named Richard appears. He doesn't try to talk her out of it directly. He asked about the memorial, but she brushed it off. He introduced his name and asked hers, but she ignored him. He tried to calm her down and asked her to step back from the cliff, but she told him he can't stop her, so he started sharing a story. He recounts the horrifying car accident that took the life of his girlfriend, Chloe. The impact of the crash left him hospitalized, completely immobile for over 2 months. Hearing his story, Iris opens up as well, admitting her guilt over leaving her son to play alone that fateful day. Richard gently tries to remind her that even in despair, life still holds fragments of beauty. As their encounter came to an end, Richard gave her one last encouragement. Iris appears to have found a brief reprieve, and they part ways. She followed him, and they walked together in the forest. Richard had parked near her car, and just as she reaches for the door, she realizes something is wrong. He has blocked her from getting inside. Before she can react, he steps out, holding an umbrella. Only it's not just an umbrella, it is a taser. With swift motion, he uses it to incapacitate her. When Iris regains consciousness, she is no longer in control. She's tied up inside an unfamiliar car. She desperately tries to use her smartwatch, but Richard calmly assures her that it's useless. He even hands her back the tiny toy boat she holds so dearly. Iris manages to slip a knife from her pocket, and with careful movements, begins cutting through the restraints. To distract him, she started asking about Chloe. Slowly and silently, she frees herself from her restraints. Seizing the moment, she attacked him with the knife. She causes a distraction while he's driving, jerking the wheel and sending the car crashing into a tree. The impact stuns them both, but there's no time to recover. They immediately struggle inside the wreckage before tumbling onto the ground in a violent scuffle. As they grappled on the forest floor, Iris managed to free herself and pointed her knife at him. At this time, Richard revealed a chilling truth. He informs Iris that she has less than 20 minutes before her body starts shutting down completely, leaving her paralyzed and unable to speak. A powerful drug is already coursing through her veins, and any exertion will only make it act faster. Realizing she has no time to waste, she makes a run for it, despite knowing the effort will accelerate the effects. She runs in the forest, but her limbs grow heavier. Her coordination begins to fail. As she runs, she sets a timer on her smartwatch, marking the 20 minutes before she loses all control. Meanwhile, Richard follows, knowing time is on his side. The more she pushes, the faster the paralysis takes hold. Her steps become labored until she can no longer walk. Forced to crawl, she finds a hiding spot in the underbrush, struggling to stay silent as her breath comes in short, panicked bursts. Richard prowls nearby, scanning the area, but she remains just out of sight. Suddenly, tiny ants swarm her face, biting at her skin. The pain is unbearable, and in her distress, she lets out a scream. This directed Richard where she is. Desperation kicks in. Unable to run, she throws herself into a body of water, letting the waves carry her. She can't swim. Her limbs are too weak, but the current drags her toward a tree where she barely manages to grab hold with her arms. Her legs already useless. With the last of her strength, she pulls herself onto the grass, but her time is almost up. Her body succumbs to the paralysis, leaving her completely motionless. She can still see, still hear, but she is powerless to move. As she lies there, helpless, she hears something approaching, the sound of a machine growing nearer. She closes her eyes, bracing for the worst. A man named Bill was the one who came with the machine. He immediately realizes something is wrong. He speaks to her, but she cannot respond. Testing her awareness, he moves a finger in front of her face, watching for any sign of recognition. She blinks. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. It's all she can do to communicate. He told her he will call 911, and he will take her to safety. He wheeled her to his house and lay her down. For a brief moment, everything is still. Then, a knock at the door. Iris showed a rapid series of blinks as a warning. Bill hesitates before opening the door. Standing outside is Richard. He claims he was in a car accident and is searching for his wife. Bill, cautious but polite, tells him to wait while he retrieves his phone. Richard steps inside uninvited, clutching his side as if injured. He asks for a phone, saying he lost his own in the crash. Bill called 911, but Richard started crying, pretending to be hurt. Bill hung up the phone and sat with Richard to talk to him. Bill watches him closely. Something feels off. As Richard subtly shifts the conversation, he probes for information, asking if Bill has a wife, trying to gain his trust. But Bill remains on guard. As they are talking, a phone rings. Bill's suspicions sharpened. Richard had claimed to have lost his phone, yet here was proof that he still had access to one. Richard realized that Bill is aware that he is lying at this point, and he confronted him, bluntly asked where Iris is. Thinking quickly, Bill improvises, telling Richard that Iris is locked in a shed outside. As Richard moves to get the phone, Bill used the opportunity, shoving him hard enough to send him crashing under a heavy bookshelf. With Richard pinned, Bill manages to call for help, momentarily gaining the upper hand, but the fight is far from over. From the floor, Richard's hand finds the handle of a knife. Without hesitation, he strikes. The blade plunges into Bill's leg first, then his stomach. Bill collapses, gasping for air, and Richard leaves him there, bleeding out. With his main obstacle removed, Richard heads to the shed, only to find it empty. Realizing Iris isn't there, he starts pouring gasoline throughout the house, soaking every surface in fuel. Iris, still paralyzed, lies hidden behind the bed. Her body remains useless, but she can move her finger. Just barely, she scrapes it against the floor, making a little noise. Richard catches it and follows the sound, his eyes landing on a trail of blood under the bed. But without hesitation, he lights a match and lets the fire spread before walking away. Outside, he climbs into his car, ready to leave her to burn. But as soon as he starts the engine, something shifts in his mind. He hesitates, and then he goes back and carries her back to his car. He sat her on the passenger seat. As he drives, his phone rings. His daughter is on the other end, excitedly telling him about her good grades. She wants to celebrate by visiting him with her mother tomorrow. Richard, his demeanor momentarily softened, demands to speak with his wife. When she confirms the visit, he has no choice but to agree. Soon the gas tank runs low, forcing him to stop at a station. He slips on sunglasses, masking his injuries, and steps out, leaving Iris alone in the car. She tries to move, and she did move her hand. She pressed weakly against the seatbelt, unlocking it. A child appears, peering at her. The sight brings back memories of her own son, but his mother quickly pulls him away. Before Iris can attempt anything further, Richard returns. He then drives to his abandoned truck from earlier, retrieving supplies and tucking them under his shirt. After securing a wire to his vehicle, he moves toward his next objective. But just as he does, he encounters a police officer. The officer knocks on the window, immediately honing in on Iris. She still cannot speak, but her presence raises suspicion. Richard hears the knock and steps in. He tells the officer that Iris is drunk, trying to dismiss any concerns. He gave the officer a fake name, Andrew. The officer asked for an ID, and Richard handed him his license. The officer noticed that the license had expired. Sensing the officer's lingering doubts, Richard spins a quick lie. His wife had been drinking, crashed into a tree, and he found her alone. The officer, unimpressed, points out the injury on Richard's head and asks how he got it. Richard struggles to answer. Inside the car, Iris pushes against her limits. With all her remaining strength, she manages to lower the window. The officer heard it and went to see her. At this time, his suspicion grew. Now he wants to hear her side of the story. Richard spins another lie, weaving a tragic story about how Iris abandoned him after they lost their son, Maddo. He paints himself as a grieving husband, left alone to deal with the pain. The officer listens, skeptical but still engaged. When the officer moved to Iris, he heard a faint whisper, "Help." The word is barely audible, but the officer hears it. But before he can react, Richard strikes. He hit the officer repeatedly, killing him. Richard dragged the body out of sight before slipping back into his car. The injection that once paralyzed Iris starts to wear off. Now, feeling her body slowly returning to her control, she speaks about him, about how being tied to a bed for 2 months left him unhinged. She brings up his past, his mind unraveling after the death of his girlfriend. And then she recalls his own words. Iris, desperate, tries to reach what remains of his humanity. She warns him, if he continues down this path, he will lose everything. His daughter, his wife. But Richard only smirks. The plan has changed. There's no time left. Instead of burning her, he will drown her. As he prepares for the final act, Iris makes her move. With what little strength she has, she drives the stolen injection into his leg, but her body is still weak, and she doesn't have the force to press the plunger. Richard rips it from her hands and empties it. She asked why he wouldn't let her die herself, but Richard has his own plan. He gets out of the car and grabs his knife and equipment. He then dragged her toward a boat. Giving up, Iris asked him to take out Maddo's toy boat from her pocket. Without thinking, he reaches for the boat. As he is doing so, Iris, who managed to get a knife, stabs him on the neck. Frustrated, he pulls out a gun, deciding to end this once and for all. But as he aims, Iris, with the last of her energy, moves the tiny boat. The sudden motion causes the gun to slip from his hands, tumbling into the water. In a fit of rage, he lunges, only to lose his balance and fall overboard. Iris seizes the fallen gun and fires. She shot him, but the shot also hits the boat. The water started getting in. Her body is still weak, and she doesn't have full control over her movements. As the boat submerges, so does she. The waves pull her under, the current dragging her down. The toy boat floats on the surface. Then, after a while, Iris emerges. Gasping for air, she pushes forward, forcing her way towards safety. Iris reaches the shore and sees Richard struggling, his body weak from the blood loss. Standing over him, she said, "Thank you." Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.